The Caucasus Mountains is one of the most isolated places in the entire world. The geography of this region created many cultures, languages, and peoples. The mountain range is so isolated that there are 5 completely unrelated language families in the area of under 600,000 square kilometers. 3 of them indigenous to the area, developing only in the Caucasus. This is fascinating because this can only happen when, for thousands of years, people in such close proximity to each other can't really speak much to people outside of their area. They are so isolated that even within these language families, like for example in the Northeast Caucasian languages which are otherwise closely related to each other, can't even understand each other at all. UFC fighter Khabib, who would speak Avar, and fighter Khamzat, who speaks Nakh, wouldn't be able to understand each other even a little. And these are very closely related languages. They would have to speak Russian to each other to understand each other as a mutual language. This sort of isolation is expected, but usually not to this extent. So how did a group of people, a community descendant of Africans, arrive in this area and completely assimilate to the point where the people in the area didn't even see them as ethnically different? A group that became native to the Caucasus and could have been there for over 1,000 years. A group we don't actually know much about for certain. How did they get there? These are a people that even challenge our notions of race as we know it. This is the story of the Afro-Abkhazians, a people in the isolated corner of the world. I will also tell you the story about Zana of Tkina, a mythical creature that genetic evidence has now tied to this community. Join me as we talk about the Black Caucasians. Afro-Abkhazians historically lived in villages on the coast of the Black Sea in what is now the autonomous state of Abkhazia. They lived in the village of Abzubza, as well as surrounding villages like Chulo, Pokvesh, Agdara, and Merkulov. Afro-Abkhazians challenge the way we see race as a construct in the West. Historically, the Black Abkhazians were seen as completely Abkhaz by the Abkhazian populations they lived beside. People didn't view them as different at all, with many early accounts of Abkhazians stating that they thought they were always there, sharing a common origin with the rest of Abkhaz society. They were completely assimilated to the culture, only spoke Abkhaz, and were not viewed as a diaspora population, in part due to the fact that people didn't even know where they came from, and neither did they themselves. They were not recognized as a distinct community by the Soviet authorities either for this reason. We don't even know for certain how many Black Abkhazians were alive during their peak population, with some records saying that there were a few families, while others claiming there were a few villages populated predominantly by Afro-Abkhazians in the 1800s. So how did these people get to the Caucasus? There are a few theories that are very likely, while others are much less likely. Let's start with the less likely theories, as they tend to be more fun, no matter how illogical they sound. One theory suggests that Black Abkhazians are descendants of the Egyptian military campaigns in the Black Sea region against the Hittites in 1275 BC. Another, which is somewhat backed up, is due to an account by Herodotus himself, the ancient Greek historian, who claimed that a group called the Colchis, an ancient group who inhabited the Caucasus in the 5th century, had dark skin, woolly hair, and an African origin. This theory of the Afro-Abkhazians being descendants of the Colchis was first proposed by an E. Lavrov in 1913. This claim was further investigated by Patrick English in 1959, citing ancient accounts of the region as well as anthropological and linguistic evidence. This claim, however, is highly unlikely, as Black Abkhazians were a small population, and modern-day Abkhazians have a genetic continuity on that land for thousands of years. So a small group who were relatively genetically quote-unquote unmixed for thousands of years, at least by the early 1900s, being phenotypically different from the Abkhaz population is almost impossible. The more prevalent hypothesis on their origin is that Africans were first brought to Abkhazia through the Ottoman slave trade in the 16 or 1700s. Having been purchased by Abkhazian royals to work on citrus plantations. However, Abkhazia was still quite difficult to reach at that time, and still is. So others believe that the Afro-Abkhazians are descendants of a wrecked slave ship carrying them as they were being transported, and this was also during the Ottoman slave trade. After this slave ship wrecked, they ended up in these coastal villages. Now, where exactly in Africa they were from is also relatively unknown, but it is believed that they were from the region of Eastern Africa, either Sudan, Ethiopia, or Somalia. Looking at them, you can definitely see the East African origin. To me, they look more Sudanese or Ethiopian. We actually don't know a lot about these people. However, there is one specific individual who is believed to be from this community who is actually an urban legend, and that person's name was Zana of Tikhina. Zana was a 19th century woman who lived in Abkhazia and became a local legend, often described as a forest woman. According to accounts, she was captured by hunters near Mount Zadan and brought to live in the village of Tikhina. Witnesses described her as unusually tall, muscular, dark-skinned, and covered in coarse hair with a wild temperament that later softened as she adapted to life in Tikhina. Zana never learned to speak the local Abkhaz language, but responded to her name and communicated with gestures and vocal sounds. She reportedly bore several children with local men and died in the 1880s. For decades, rumors suggested Zana might have been some kind of non-human creature, but modern DNA analysis of her descendants and skeletal remains revealed that she was fully human, carrying the African mitochondrial haplogroup L2. This evidence suggests she or her ancestors likely arrived in the region through the Ottoman-era slave trade, with roots in equatorial Africa, possibly Sudan or nearby areas. Zana is often linked to the Afro-Abkhazians, as her African ancestry makes her one of the few documented individuals of African descent integrated into the local population. However, she was remembered as an unusual figure rather than part of the established Afro-Abkhazian families, and we don't know for certain if she was even Afro-Abkhaz. So where are the Afro-Abkhazians now? During Soviet rule, the Afro-Abkhazian villagers who were impoverished and isolated could have been subject to deportation to other parts of the Soviet Union. Many moved to other bigger cities in the USSR and mixed with other communities. Their descendants exist, but the Afro-Abkhazian community itself doesn't exist anymore. There aren't even any photos of them that aren't black and white. They genetically assimilated with the larger, non-black communities. The story of the Afro-Abkhazians is both extraordinary and tragic. In one of the world's most isolated mountain regions, they were fully embraced as part of the local Abkhaz community. Their origins unknown even to themselves. Over centuries, they became living proof of how fluid identity can be, showing that language, culture, and belonging can matter more than appearance. Figures like Zana of Tikhina add a layer of mystery, hinting at journeys across continents that ended in the Caucasus long before modern records began. Yet this unique community did not survive intact. War, displacement, and assimilation erased much of their presence, leaving behind only stories, fragments of oral history, and the scattered descendants who carry their heritage today. The Afro-Abkhazians remind us how diverse human history truly is, and how easily entire peoples can be forgotten if their stories aren't preserved.